Alrighty, hello, welcome back to the Three-Handed Bandits channel. It's Nathan, back with another breakdown for you of our 23rd ranked Las Vegas Raiders. This series, we're going to be unveiling our 2023-2024 preseason power rankings, starting from the worst team till ultimately we get to our number one team who we think will win the Super Bowl. And today we're going to be talking about the Las Vegas Raiders. Before we get into everything, though, please like, subscribe, share these videos, and stick around to see where every single team ranks. Today we're going to be talking about the Raiders. Last year, the Raiders were a team that I was super high on. Obviously, coming off the previous season, they had a really good year despite a lot of chaos with Derek Carr, who was playing like a really great quarterback. But last year, Derek Carr really took a step back, and this new regime, this entire team in general, just was really underwhelming. But they had a lot of change this offseason on the roster, and they're hoping that they'll take some steps up and try to compete in this really difficult AFC. It's really going to start at the quarterback spot with Jimmy Garoppolo, who they're bringing over from the Niners. He's familiar with McDaniels, obviously was with him in New England a handful of years ago, and I think he'll do a much better job of playing within the structure and scheme of this offense than Derek Carr did last year. They also lost Jared Stidham last year, who came in at the very end of the season and actually looked pretty decent, but they drafted Aiden O'Connell in the fourth round as well, who could maybe come in. We're not really expecting a full season from Jimmy Garoppolo at this point, so maybe Aiden O'Connell comes in and could be a Brock Purdy-esque figure for this team, although he does have more tools than Brock Purdy did. They also bring in Jacoby Myers, DeAndre Carter. In the third round, they draft Trey Tucker. So trying to bring in some more talent in this wide receiver room. They also draft Michael Mayer in the second round, bring in Austin Hooper and O.J. Howard. So they're also trying to bring a lot more talent in the tight end room because they're losing Mac Hollins, Darren Waller, and Foster Moreau as decent pass-catching options for them. But they're definitely trying to find the new guys to fit the scheme for them. Then on the defense, there's also a lot of guys that they're bringing in. The interior line, they're bringing Adam Butler, John Jenkins, and in the third round, they bring in Byron Young. They'll really just replace Andrew Billings, but overall just increase the talent of that unit. They're losing Clelin Ferrell on the edge, obviously a first-round pick from this Mike Mayock and John Gruden regime, who was criticized at the time and obviously was underwhelming. But they're bringing Tyree Wilson, who they're hoping is going to be a great number two option to Max Crosby. Also bringing Jordan Willis as a depth piece. They're bringing in Robert Spillane over from Pittsburgh as they're losing Denzel Perryman and Jayon Brown. And then in the secondary, they're bringing in a lot of new faces with Brandon Faison, Duke Shelley, David Long, and Corey Bennett, a fourth-round rookie, as well as bringing in Marcus Epps over from Philadelphia to play safety for him. As they're losing Rocky Sin and Daron Harmon on the back end. So overall, they brought in a lot of people trying to bring some more talent to this roster. And overall, I do think they're probably upgrading this roster overall in total. I think Darren Waller, Foster Moreau, Denzel Perryman, Rocky Sin are all plus starters that they're losing. But everywhere else, I think they're doing a pretty good job of upgrading. I think quarterback's going to be a real big question mark for this team still, though, just because I don't know if we're going to get a full season of Jimmy Garoppolo, obviously. But I think Derek Carr was really bad last year. I do think Derek Carr wound up playing better, but I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to give them better quarterback play than what they got from from Derek Carr last year. So let's go ahead and talk about this coaching staff, and we'll transition to the offense. So obviously, Josh McDaniels is their head coach. I do think he's a really good coach, but last year this team really struggled. But I do think this offense is going to play a lot better with Jimmy Garoppolo. He's going to play within this scheme better, and this scheme relies a lot on getting the ball out quickly and letting your playmakers do a lot more of the heavy lifting. And I do think that Jimmy G is going to do a better job of getting the ball out quickly for him. They also got Mick Lombardi here, but it's Josh McDaniels' offense and his team, and we'll see what we get from him. And then the defensive coordinator got Patrick Graham, who a couple years ago for the Giants had a really good defense. And he was a guy that had some hype last year, but this defense wasn't great. Granted, they had a really bad roster, but he's been spent a lot of time with Belichick, and so he's going to have a real multiple team, and they're not going to be scared to mix up their coverages or what they're really doing with this unit. This coaching staff does have a lot to prove. Obviously, Josh McDaniels didn't really do a great job when he was the Broncos head coach years ago. And year one wasn't great of this regime. And Patrick Graham was a guy that had a lot of hype, but his defense wasn't necessarily great last year either. So these guys do have a lot to prove. I do think they are good coaches, and I will think that they will prove that they are good coaches. We kind of just need to see that. But I think as they get more of their own guys in, we'll really start seeing this coaching work. But Josh McDaniels is the guy I like. Just has to show us that he is a good guy. This offense, though, I do think is in store to be a lot better than it was last year. A lot of the struggles last year was from Derek Carr, who was not the same Derek Carr we've seen before. He was borderline a bottom five quarterback last year. He was just not playing very well. And I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to do a really good job coming in. Obviously, might be the definition of system quarterback, but he's a guy that's going to come in. He's going to play exactly to the scheme. Is going to rely on his playmakers around him to play really well. But he's going to be a guy who's going to get the ball out quick, and not really going to win you games, but he won't necessarily cost you games. When it gets to third and longs, he may struggle a little bit, but as long as he's playing within the scheme and everything's going right, this is going to be an offense that's going to be able to move the ball really well. Outside of him, they got Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell. Not expecting really much from those guys. And, if Jimmy Garoppolo does go down, I think Brian Hoyer might be okay coming into a game, but I really don't want Brian Hoyer starting. So maybe Aiden O'Connell could come in as a guy with some tools and develop into a decent quarterback if Jimmy Garoppolo does go down. But overall, I do think you're going to end up getting, at least 10 really good games of Jimmy Garoppolo. But obviously at this point in his career, you just cannot expect him to play a full season because he just hasn't been able to stay healthy at all. Any year he just hasn't stayed healthy. And so I think if he goes down, this team is really going to be bad on offense. But if he's playing, while he's playing, it's going to be a pretty decent offense, I feel like. Part of the reason I'm optimistic is I do think they have pretty decent playmakers, and that's going to start off with Davante Adams, who's one of the top 5 wide receivers in the NFL still. He's really excellent, can win all 3 levels, can win contested catches, can get open quickly. He's just a really good wide receiver. Not much needs to be said about him. Hunter Renfrow did struggle last year, didn't have a great year, had a couple of fumbles, and just, I think with Derek Carr underperforming, that kind of hurt him as well. But I do think he'll positively regress and play a little bit better this year as one of the better slot wide receivers in the NFL. And then obviously they bring in Jacoby Myers over from New England, who obviously helped them win that game, helped the Raiders win the game last year against New England with that weird 30-yard lateral that was intercepted by Chandler Jones and got Mac Jones stiff-armed into the dirt. He's just an okay wide receiver. He's a guy that a lot of people like. I just don't really see it. Matt Collins had a pretty productive year for this team last year, and I really don't think Jacoby Myers is going to be much better than Matt Collins, if I'm being honest. He's not a guy that I see a whole lot from. Outside of that, though, got Keelan Cole. He's going to be good for one insane catch, probably, because he seems to do that every single year. They bring in DeAndre Carter, could be a little bit of a slot option, can win deep, could be a bit of a return man, can kind of wear a lot of different hats for him. Then Trey Tucker in the 3rd round. I don't know how much he'll get on the field, but maybe could develop into a pretty decent guy and could give them an option to move on from Hunter Renfrow if he's not playing any better. And then they got Philip Dorsett here as well. Got some speed to be a good deep threat, but doesn't provide a whole lot outside of that. Tight end room. We're expecting a good year from Michael Mayer. He's a rookie tight end. We've seen a lot of these rookie tight ends struggle a little bit, but I think he could have a pretty decent year. It probably won't be to what Darren Waller was, but still I think we'll be in for a pretty solid year. He's one of these Jason Witten-esque figures. He's not a Kelsey, but he's definitely Jason Witten to be a guy who can be a 3rd down chain mover and has some tools to be a little bit more of an elite guy than what Jason Witten was. Austin Hooper was a guy that people were really excited for years ago in Atlanta and hasn't really taken much strides forward. It's a pretty solid tight end, though. And then O.J. Howard is kind of just a weird he's a weird player. Not a great blocker. He's got some athleticism though, so they can maybe use him to get some productive plays out of him. But overall, I think you're excited about this weaponry. Mainly Devontae Adams, and you're hoping that Hunter Renfrow has a much better year. But I think that these guys are gonna, play the scheme well. Obviously, Jacoby Myers was a New England Patriot with Josh McDaniels, and so he's gonna know this scheme. So I think you're gonna get pretty good play from these guys. And then running the ball, obviously Josh Jacobs broke out last year, was one of the best running backs in the league, and is probably going to have another really good year in this scheme for this offense if he ends up playing on the franchise tag and doesn't hold out like Saquon's been talking about with all this running back not being paid stuff that's been going on. Outside of Josh Jacobs, Amir Abdullah, Brandon Bolden are kind of some third down backs, but you're not going to see a whole lot of them. And then Zamir White, expect a big year from him if Josh Jacobs doesn't play. I definitely don't think Zamir White is going to be what Josh Jacobs is. Could still be a solid running back who has some good athleticism and explosion. I do think we have a pretty good offensive line, though. Colton Miller at left tackle is one of the best left tackles in the league. He's not Trent Williams or Laramie Tunsil, but he's probably, third right there behind those guys. He's a really good left tackle and a really good pass blocker. So I think you feel good about him. The rest of the offensive line is not quite as good. We got Alex Bars, who's probably going to be the weak spot at guard. So if he struggles, they'll also have Greg Van Roten, who can maybe play a little bit of guard if he's not doing all right. He's a guy who played a little bit for them last year, but it's definitely going to be the biggest eyesore for this team. The interior guys with Andre James and Dylan Parham, though, you feel pretty decent about. They were pretty good starters, and there were some of these Gruden grinders. And they've played really well, and I expect they'll probably have another good year. I don't know how much better they'll get. I mean, Dylan Parham's a young guy, so he could develop into a better guard. I think they're just going to be serviceable. I really don't see them taking steps forward to be, super elite players, but I don't think they're going to be a liability for this team either. And then same thing with Jermaine Illuminor. Is a guy that's going to be a really solid right tackle. I think overall you're going to have probably not a top 10 unit, just because I don't think you have enough really good options. But I really don't think this is going to be a bad offensive line, because even your depth, Braden Parker, Thayer Munford, Justin Herron, and Justin Murray, you got some serviceable guys as some backup guys, and then Greg Van Roten can play on the interior. So overall, I do think you're probably in store for a top half offensive line, just not one of the top handful, just because I do think we need to see more from likes of Parham and Andre James and Illuminor before we really start feeling good about this being a top 10 unit. But obviously you got a franchise left tackle, and if these other guys continue playing well, then you're going to have a really good unit. And overall, I do think you're going to have a really good offense. I do think in the games that Jimmy Garoppolo plays, I don't really think we're going to have a top 10 unit, but I do think we're going to have a top half unit. I could really see this being the 14th best offense all year if Jimmy Garoppolo is playing. And I think it's going to be a really good unit. If he goes down, though, which is very likely at this point, who knows what this offense is going to be. It's probably going to be the worst offense if Jimmy Garoppolo goes down. But if you get 14 games of really good offense with Jimmy Garoppolo, that is going to be enough to win a handful of games. So overall, the only thing I'm worried about for this offense is Jimmy Garoppolo and his health. I'm not really worried about this offensive line or the playmakers or the running back room. You know what I mean? I do think they have a lot of talent across the board on this offense. Defense, though, still a little bit worrying, but I do think they're going to start making some improvements just because I do think this roster is getting better. It's going to start on the edge with Max Crosby, who is one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. He's on the same tier of the Nick Bosa's, Micah Parsons. He's a great edge rusher and does a pretty good job of defending the run on the edge as well. On the other edge spot, obviously they drafted Tyree Wilson in the first round, and they still have Chandler Jones. I think starting off the year, we're going to see a lot more Tyree Wilson on early downs, defending the run. And Chandler Jones can be a little bit more of a pass rush specialist. But Chandler Jones isn't the same Chandler Jones we've seen before. You can really see that he's starting to regress. So I'm not expecting much from him. And I do think by the end of the year that we're going to see a lot more of Tyree Wilson starting on the edge for him and, getting after the quarterback. Overall, I think Tyree Wilson is a good pick. I don't know if he's ever going to develop into a Max Crosby or one of the Bosa brothers-esque player. I do think he has a lot of strength, and at the very least is going to be a really good run defender, even if he doesn't take steps forward as a pass rusher. But I do kind of see Tyree Wilson a little bit more and the Jadeveon Clowney type of guys coming out. But I do think he has the tools, the length, and the speed, strength to eventually one day be an elite guy. I mean, he definitely does have the tools where he could do it. I just don't necessarily believe in him just because he does remind me of Jadeveon Clowney. But I definitely don't think you're going to be upset that you have him. He's going to be a good player. And Chandler Jones, who knows what we're really going to get from him this year. They got some edge depth. That's all right, though, with Jordan Willis, Malcolm Kuntz, and Adam Plant. I'll kind of rotate in, but obviously if Max Crosby goes down, you're going to be really worried about this defense. On the interior, they have a bunch of guys. Jerry Tillery has made improvements and getting after the quarterback. However, he is a complete liability in the running game. But at least he is getting somewhat better as a pass rusher. But still, if he's on the field on any rundowns, he's getting blown off the ball. So Bilal Nichols is going to be your main kind of run defending guy. Bilal Nichols does do a pretty good job of getting after the quarterback as well. It's definitely never going to be a Chris Jones or Aaron Donald, but he's a really solid nose tackle for this team. And then they did a good job of bringing in some depth. Neil Farrell's just a straight-up run defender. You do not want him getting after the quarterback. But Adam Butler, John Jenkins, and Byron Young are all going to be able to rotate in. And maybe we're hoping that Byron Young will be able to get after the quarterback and hopefully give you someone who can play instead of Jerry Tillery. Just because I don't think anybody's going to be as bad defending the run as Jerry Tillery does. And so overall, I do think you're in store for a decent pass rush, mainly because you have Max Crosby. Having one of the top 4 or 5 edge rushers in the league is going to help your pass rush. It's going to make the job a lot easier for Bilal Nichols, Chandler Jones, or Tyree Wilson, who are starting on the edge part. So I do think it's going to help them on the other end. But if Max Crosby does go down, this might be the worst D-line in the entire league. So you're really relying on him to stay healthy to continue his great play. In the linebacking room, though, I do think you're a little bit more excited. I think Divine Diablo, who definitely has probably the best name in NFL history, is a linebacker who's been showing growth every single year. He's a really good athlete, and I think he's going to be in store for another really good season. Worst case, I think you'll get okay play from him. But I think you'll probably end up having really good play for him, and hopefully next year you're hoping that he'll take another step up to be an elite guy. I don't know if he'll ever be quite an elite guy. I don't really see Fred Warner from him, but I do think he's going to be a really good linebacker for this team. And worst case, they bring in Robert Spillane, who's just a really solid do-it-all linebacker who's going to help this unit. Also got Luke Masterson here, who's kind of just depth. He's an okay linebacker. But overall, I do think you're going to have a pretty decent front seven. Granted, it all relies on the health of Max Crosby. Max Crosby goes down, this defense is going to be horrible. But as long as he's still here, his elite presence on the edge alone is going to drag this defense up a lot of spots in the rankings. Secondary could be a little bit suspect for this team. They got Trayvon Moehrig and Marcus Epps, who are pretty locked in to be their starting safeties. They're okay, guys. Trayvon Moehrig hasn't fully developed into a star and elite safety. But he's still a really good safety and probably have another really good year for this team. Marcus Epps is coming off a great year in Philadelphia. Obviously, though, that defense had so much talent, so I think he could be due for a little bit of regression, but I do think he's a pretty solid safety. And so you feel good about those guys on the back end. Then you feel good about Nate Hobbs as one of your cornerbacks, who's actually developed into a really good corner. And you're really happy you have him here. The other 2 cornerback spots, you are a little questionable at what's going to happen there. I think Duke Shelley will probably be one of the starters on the outside. Maybe not to start off the year because Brandon Faison is getting paid more, so they might throw him out there because he is getting more money. But I do think at some point Duke Shelley eventually is going to become the starter. And he's a guy who had a really decent year in Minnesota last year, really late, started having some really good games for this team. So I do think he'll probably end up starting for them. Then it looks like David Long might be your slot guy. He's a real kind of low-end slot guy who can do a little bit of, he's an okay guy, can do a little bit of everything, but doesn't have a whole lot of upside. And then also got Taylor Hall, who could end up playing some games for this team as well if one of those other guys isn't working out. So I really think you got Taylor Hall, Duke Shelley, and Brandon Faison really competing for that outside cornerback spot. And then Amik Robertson, Sam Webb are decent slot cornerbacks, and they could maybe play if David Long isn't playing very well to start off the year. And then Jacorian Bennett doesn't really have a clear path to getting on the field, but maybe could develop and hopefully be a good cornerback for this team, or at least some good depth for this team if they start having injuries. I do think if Nate Hobbs goes down there, you're going to have a lot of question marks. But you feel good about him and your safety group. It's kind of just going to see who's going to step up on the outside. So overall for this offense, or for this defense, I do think we have what could be a really good unit. It's all really just going to depend on Max Crosby staying healthy. As long as he's healthy, I do think you're going to have, the 20th-ish defense. I don't think they have enough talent yet to be to ever threaten to be a top 10 unit. But I do think they have a lot more talent than what they've had in previous years, and you're hoping that Patrick Graham is the real deal and can really get the best out of this roster talent. Max Crosby goes down, though. I'm going to say no doubt you have the worst defense in the league, so Max Crosby is so important for this team overall. Looking at their schedule, though, their schedule is very difficult. Obviously, they're in the AFC and the AFC West, which has a lot of really talented teams. Their Vegas line's at 7.5. I have them right around 6.5, so I take the under. They do have a lot of tough games, so I do think this is going to be a team that's probably going to be a lot better than the record indicates. But opening up their first two games at Denver, at Buffalo, is just a brutal start. I think that's probably going to be 0-2. And then Pittsburgh week 3 at home. It's going to be another really tough defense they have to go against. Then they have to go to the Chargers and then face Green Bay and New England at home. So I think best case scenario, you can win those Green Bay and Pitt games. But I really think that they can beat Green Bay. I think they'll probably end up being 1-4 at this point in the year. Or 1-5, maybe 2-4 at this point in the year. Just because I do think they'll lose to New England. I don't think Bill Belichick is going to like how the Patriots lost last year. Then they have to go to Chicago, which I do think could be another game that they could win. But at Detroit, and then games against the Giants and Jets back-to-back, I think is pretty rough. And they have to go to Miami and then face KC. So this middle part of the schedule is really difficult. Week 8 through week 12, I think that's 5 straight losses. Pair them with 8 losses, or putting them at 8 losses after I think at least 3 losses in the opening part of their schedule. I think at this point they'll probably be at 8 losses. And kind of out of the playoff picture, but then facing Minnesota and the Chargers at home, going to KC, to Indy, and then finishing off the season with Denver. So I have them at 6.5 wins. I do end up thinking this is going to be a team that's probably going to be around 5 or 6 wins. I do think they're going to be a lot better of a team than the record is going to indicate. I do think they're going to be a solid team. They just have an absolute brutal schedule. You're happy that at least you have the Jets, Giants, Patriots, Pittsburgh and Green Bay at home. So that might help you win a couple of these games. But I think Indy's really the only game that you feel good as a certain win for this team. So overall, I do see a world where this is a 4 or 5 win team who has one of the top, 5 picks in the NFL draft. But it also is a team that has a lot of talent and I think could get to 7, 8, wins and be a decent team. I just don't see this as a team that really has a realistic shot to actually make the playoffs. I think if they're going against Atlanta, I think this is a team that could beat Atlanta, who was our previous team. But I think Atlanta is going to benefit from an easy schedule, and Oakland has the exact opposite. I do think they have one of the toughest schedules in the entire league. So kind of recapping everything, this coaching staff does have a lot to prove. It is a unit that I believe in. We kind of just need to see see those improvements for them. Then obviously, how many games do we get from Jimmy G? He hasn't played a full season since that 2019 season where they made it to the Super Bowl. So I think he's a good quarterback. We just need him to actually play. Otherwise, this offense is going to fall off the cliff. But they have a good skill group and a decent offensive line. So I think they do have the potential for a decent offense. And I do think that their defensive talent is improving. We kind of just need, a few pieces to develop and hope that Patrick Graham's the real deal. But they do have such a brutal schedule at Buffalo, at Detroit, Jets, at Miami, at Minnesota. I mean, those are some hard games. And that's not even talking about, the games inside their division. So overall, it's just a brutal schedule. But maybe they could be due for some close game regression. Last year, they were 4-9 in one-score games. So that means they lost a lot of really close games. And last year, they were 0-4 in their first 4 one-score games. And that led them at a 1-4 record. And it was really hard for them to come back from that. So maybe they could be due for a little bit more regression and win a couple more games. And maybe that could get them to, 7, 8, 9 wins. I just don't fully see that happening. I do think it's going to be another disappointing year for Raiders fans. But I do think we're in a little bit better of a spot than we were last year, especially with the defensive talent. And I do think heading into next year, we're going to be a lot more excited about this Raiders team. But this year, I do think it's just going to be a bad year. We'll say that. But Raiders fans, let me know where I'm right about this team. Let me know where I'm wrong about this team. And just overall, let me know what you think about my breakdown and analysis of this Raiders team. If you stuck around for the entire thing, please please subscribe, and we'll be back with the 22nd ranked team very, very soon. All right, guys, thank you all for watching.